Star Wars: The Bad Batch is easily one of the best of the recent Star Wars TV series, a worthy heir to the legacy of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. We've put out quite a few videos about the series over the course of its 3-season run, and as we've hopefully made clear by now, The Bad Batch isn't only a very fun watch, but also every bit as layered as the Clone Wars before it. Not only that, but it actively picks up on several key themes from the Clone Wars, resolving or adding new layers to them, providing new perspectives on the events of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Empire. In this video, we'll be taking a look at some of the main themes of the Bad Batch and how they complete the saga of the Grand Army of the Republic.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Bad Batch begins where the Clone Wars left off. Its first episode, appropriately titled Aftermath, starts off on the last day of the Clone Wars, in the thick of the action on the planet Kala. We're thrown into an epic battle between the forces of the Republic and those of the Separatists, a dynamic that, by this point, we've seen many times before. As in many cases during Star Wars: The Clone Wars, neither the reason for this battle nor its purpose are made clear, and there are no civilians in sight. All we have are a small but fierce legion of clone troopers led into battle by Jedi generals engaged against the droid armies of the Separatists. The viewer is thrust into this situation with no context, but the show nonetheless leads them to a familiar assumption that the Republic is fighting to liberate the planet from the CIS. As this first part of Aftermath sets the stage, it also brings us to our protagonists. Unlike Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which was an anthology that told us the story of conflict rather than a specific cast of characters, The Bad Batch does have main characters, the titular members of the Bad Batch, or more formally, Clone Force 99. These guys were first introduced in the Clone Wars' last season, and the Bad Batch's premiere quickly and succinctly reintroduces us to each of them in its opening sequence. You've got Hunter, the leader of the squad, an expert tracker and dependable commander, Wrecker, the gregarious and energetic tank of the team, Tech, a reserved but hyper-intelligent analyst, Crosshair, a cynical, sarcastic marksman, and the team's latest addition, Echo, a cyborg who, while not as by the book as he once was, retains a fierce loyalty to the Republic. We follow the members of the Bad Batch as they help their fellow clones drive the droids back, securing another victory for the Republic. But then, the dynamic of the battle suddenly changes. A priority order comes through from Coruscant, and without warning, the other clones turn on the Jedi. The Bad Batch returns to Kamino soon after, and there, they discover this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. The Jedi have been marked for death all across the galaxy. Soon after, the droid army is shut down, the Clone Wars are brought to an end, and the Republic is officially transformed into the Galactic Empire. Just like that, the war is over, and a new chapter of galactic history has begun. The members of the Bad Batch watch all of this with varying levels of unease. Hunter, especially, is perturbed by the execution of the Jedi. It makes no sense to him, and it makes even less sense how readily the other clones have gone along with it. The declaration of a new order is also troubling. For years, the Bad Batch has been fighting to save the Republic, and now, the Republic doesn't exist, replaced with something new and unfamiliar. The other members of the squad share Hunter's concern to varying levels, except for Crosshair, who seems unconcerned with all of it. As far as he cares, orders are orders, and as he sees it, there isn't much of a difference between the Republic and the Empire anyway. Things quickly escalate from there. Hunter, and most of the others, quickly become suspicious of the new Empire and its motives, and they decide to defect. At first, they simply try to desert the Empire. Before long though, they realize that if they're ever going to be free, they need to actively fight back against it. Crosshair, however, goes in the opposite direction. He affirms his loyalty to the Empire and turns against the rest of his squad. Crosshair's place is ultimately taken by Omega, a young clone who tags along with the Bad Batch during their escape from Kamino, and who ultimately becomes a valued part of the squad. From here on, the Bad Batch follows the titular squad in their adventures across the galaxy as they fight to survive and undermine the Empire. In the process, the show dives deep into the lives and nature of the Republic's clone troopers as a whole, their role in the galaxy, and what'll happen to them now that the war is over. As we discussed in our retrospective about Star Wars: The Clone Wars, that show primarily develops the clones in two key ways. First, it shows that the clones are all individuals with hopes, dreams, and their own unique personalities. Secondly, it shows that the clones are de facto slaves of a government that considers them expendable and in which they have no stake. On the one hand, we're shown clearly that clones are human beings rather than living droids. On the other hand, we're shown that the circumstances they've been born into effectively strip them of their humanity and agency. They're slave soldiers, pawns in a grand Sith plot, created solely to usher in the rise of the Empire. A few clones in the Clone Wars come to understand this, culminating in Captain Rex deciding to reject the war and the Empire altogether in the series finale, but most do not. Part of this is because they're so thoroughly indoctrinated that they're unable to make the same choice, but this is also because of how the clones perceive loyalty. For the clones, loyalty is everything, and while they mostly value interpersonal loyalty, they've been taught to conflate this with loyalty to authority, specifically to the Republic. Even those clones who understand the truth of their existence struggle to do anything about it because, to them, doing so would make them a traitor. Those clones who do rebel first have to learn that true betrayal would be continuing to serve a Republic that's using them for nefarious purposes. Clone Force 99 figures out this step pretty quickly, Crosshair excluded, and this allows them to follow Rex's lead, the first of many clones to do so over the course of the series. Unlike with Rex, however, the Bad Batch's break with the Empire is only the start of their journey, and it's what happens to them afterwards that brings them onto the same page as Rex. They made the choice first, and only later do they really understand what it meant. A lot of the Bad Batch is dedicated to this journey, and in the process, it retreads some old ground from Star Wars: The Clone Wars, but it also expands on its predecessors' lessons and brings them to a new conclusion. It starts by having the Bad Batch break free of their indoctrination, bit by bit. This is made a bit easier for them by the fact that they start out seeing the Empire as something different from the Republic. Once the Bad Batch comes to believe that the Empire is more sinister than the Republic, then it's easy for them to decide that their loyalty to the Republic and everything they believed about it no longer applied. They got confirmation of the Empire's evil in their first post-war mission on Onderon, where the Empire wanted them to massacre civilian dissidents and refugees together with Saw Gerrera's guerrillas. Following that mission, the Batch determines that their noble fight in defense of the Republic has suddenly become something evil, and they want no part in it any longer. But as their journey continues, the Bad Batch is forced to confront mounting evidence that the fight they were raised for was never noble to begin with. In the Season 1 episode, Common Ground, they find themselves on the same side as a separatist senator, and their experience forces them to confront some of their preconceptions about the war. Much as the Clone Wars' heroes on both sides did, this episode establishes that the separatists weren't all evil, and this episode goes further by showing that the separatists' concerns about an increasingly tyrannical republic weren't all that wrong. The Bad Batch, as well as the audience, sees that Raxus has come under an oppressive military occupation, one that doesn't look all that different from the separatist occupations of planets like Ryloth. The rise of the Empire proves that the separatists were onto something. The show drills this in the Season 2 episode, The Solitary Clone, which involves Crosshair and Commander Cody putting down a separatist holdout. In this episode, the separatists are framed as heroes defending their homes against Imperial conquerors. When they fail in the end, their planet is enslaved and brought under Imperial military rule. While the Bad Batch isn't around for this storyline, it still reinforces an important message for the audience. That many of the separatists really were just fighting for the independence of their homeworld, and the Republic's war against them was a war of conquest, something made explicit under the Empire. Even those who allied with the Republic during the Clone Wars aren't safe from Imperial tyranny. In the episodes Devil's Deal and Rescue on Ryloth in Season 1, we watch as the Republic's alliance with the Twi'lek government turns into a prolonged military occupation of Ryloth. After the end of the war, the Empire refuses to withdraw its troops from the planet. Instead, it sets about taking the planet's Dunium resources, and it crushes Ryloth's legitimate government at the first sign of resistance. All of these things are done by the Empire, of course, not the Republic, but as Crosshair pointed out in the series premiere, there really wasn't much of a difference. The people overseeing these abuses were Republic officers during the war, and the abuses are being carried out by clone troopers. Perhaps more importantly, these things began during the Clone Wars. The story of the Separatist holdout in The Solitary Clone makes it clear. While there were certainly evil figures in the Confederacy, most Separatists were just ordinary people fighting to defend their homes. Far from waging war in self-defense, the Republic was engaging in imperialism in the Clone Wars. To paraphrase from the Revenge of the Sith novelization, it first became an empire in fact, and then, inevitably, an empire in name as well. That was the true nature of the Clone Wars, and it was the true intended purpose of the clones. This is something that the Bad Batch, particularly Echo, finds hard to accept. While the evil of the Empire is inescapable, many of them retain a certain nostalgia for the Republic, like many other rebels of later eras did. But one conclusion becomes unavoidable. The clones were created as pawns, and their purpose in the Clone Wars was to facilitate the rise of the Empire. But now, the clones have fulfilled that purpose, and throughout the Bad Batch, we see that the Empire has decided to discard them. With the exception of a few well-meaning senators, the imperialists the clones served in the Clone Wars don't care about their sacrifices or their welfare, and many of them now want to do away with the clones altogether. Early in the Season 1 episode, Replacements, we're introduced to Vice Admiral Rampart's Project War Mantle, which seeks to replace the clone army with a force of recruited human soldiers. As the show goes on, we see Rampart's vision become reality. Recruited human TK troopers are introduced toward the end of Season 1 in the episode War Mantle, and as the series goes on, they steadily begin to replace the clones. Those clones who remain in service are increasingly treated as lesser beings by their superiors who openly favor the TK troopers. This is shown most poignantly in the Season 2 episode The Outpost, in which Crosshair and another clone are made to risk their lives for the sake of a box of surplus TK trooper gear. The Bad Batch makes it abundantly clear that the clones are slaves of the Empire, treated as property and rewarded for their loyalty with abandonment and betrayal. Even Crosshair, who we see demonstrate his genuine, heartfelt loyalty to the New Order time and time again, is treated as lesser and disposable when compared to new recruits who haven't done half as much as Crosshair did for the Empire. This isn't a new phenomenon under the Empire either. The clones were always slaves, even under the Republic. Unfortunately, most clones only start to realize this when they're being discarded. In the episode The Clone Conspiracy, a scene set in a clone bar in Coruscant gives us a glimpse of how the clones take this. The clones there are full of dismay and uncertainty, and they're drinking themselves into stupors in response, unable to reconcile their instilled loyalty to the Republic with how they're being abandoned. We see this further in how they react to Senator Chuchi's proposal that the Senate pass a measure that will allow the clones to retire comfortably. The clones don't want to retire, they tell her. They want to keep fighting for the Empire. But as the show goes on, this contradiction drives more and more clones to realize the truth. Not only that the Empire has betrayed them, but that the government had never really cared about them in the first place. They were betrayed from the beginning. In the Clone Wars, the clones treat betrayal as the ultimate sin. Loyalty means everything to them, and that, in large part, is how the forces of the dark side got the clones to do their bidding, because the clones have been programmed to be loyal to a government controlled by the Sith and run by imperialists. Most clones would prefer to be used as pawns and treated as slaves than to become traitors. The Bad Batch is ultimately able to see through this as they realize that serving the Empire would be a betrayal of their comrades and everything they supposedly fought for. But many other clones just aren't independent-minded enough. But more and more clones start to come around over the course of the show, and for a simple reason. The Empire itself is treacherous, and the more clones see this, the less they want anything to do with it. We see this for the first time in non-Bad Batch clones at the end of Rescue on Ryloth. When Captain Hauser realizes that the Empire was betraying their former Twi'lek brothers-in-arms, he leads a mutiny which helps Champs and Jula escape Imperial custody. These clones end up joining a clone resistance cell led by Captain Rex, which grows in size over the course of the series, especially after the Empire destroys Topoka City at the end of Season 1. This is rightly seen by many clones as the ultimate betrayal, especially for those clones who are forced to lay waste to their own homeworld. As the insults from the Empire continue to accumulate and the clones are increasingly pushed to the sidelines, these betrayals help the clones to realize that their loyalty had been misplaced, and this starts leading to more and more desertion. Because as the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch alike continuously show, the clones are still people, and as more and more of them make the choice to leave Imperial service, they begin to regain the agency their service to the Republic and Empire had stripped them of. This is what the Bad Batch adds to the Clone Wars' messaging about the nature of the clones. The Clone Wars shows us that, despite their indisputable personhood, the clones aren't free, and only a few are able to make the choice to change that. But the Bad Batch pushes more and more clones to choose to be free, and beyond that, it allows them to redefine who and what they are. In stripping the clones of their original purpose, the Empire ironically ends up allowing the clones to decide their purpose for themselves, to choose their own place in the galaxy. This is what the Bad Batch is really about. It isn't just the story of one squad and their wayward brother, but about the clones as a whole taking their fates into their own hands. Of course, we see this primarily through the story of Clone Force 99 itself. As Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, Echo, and Omega struggle to survive, their break from the Empire requires them to redefine themselves and their place in the galaxy. Like other clones, this starts with needing to find a new purpose for themselves, now that they're no longer soldiers, at least not officially. Beginning with the episode Rampage in Season 1, they start working for Sid on Ord Mantell, essentially serving as freelance goons. But this isn't all that far from their original working relationship under the Republic and Empire. They're pretty much still soldiers doing missions. The Bad Batch does have much greater variety in the types of missions they're doing under Sid, and a little bit more of a say in what they can and can't do, but they're ultimately at Sid's mercy. Sid repeatedly volunteers them for missions without their consent, and she uses her knowledge of the Batch's wanted status to get them to do pretty much anything she needs. Sid repeatedly proves herself untrustworthy and disloyal, leading to the Bad Batch to begin to distance themselves from her, and in the Season 2 finale, Plan 99, Sid ultimately sells the Bad Batch out to the Empire. Many of the episodes that focus on Sid's missions, particularly in Season 2, are often derided as filler, but they do serve a purpose in the overall narrative of the show. They demonstrate that the Bad Batch really isn't any freer working for Sid than they were working for the Empire. It might be more of a personal relationship, and it might even be an improvement in some respects, but while Sid does at least see the clones as people, she still doesn't really treat them as such. Like the Empire, Sid uses the members of the Bad Batch as tools and doesn't demonstrate any real loyalty to them, and so the Batch eventually cuts her off. When they later return to Sid in their time of greatest need, she betrays them, confirming that she was never worthy of their loyalty either. But the episodes also introduce a Phee Genoa, who shows the Bad Batch that things could be better. Unlike Sid, Phee treats the Bad Batch with respect, and she neither betrays them nor uses them as tools. Phee treats the clones as partners rather than subordinates, and it's this that gets the members of the Bad Batch to see how Sid's been abusing them. The Bad Batch isn't able to work with Phee long term, But she does end up introducing them to Pabu in the episode of the same name, where the squad is finally able to find what they've been missing: community. On Pabu, the Bad Batch finally finds a place where they're truly accepted as people. The community there treats them as equals, first as guests and then as fellow citizens, and they show the Batch the loyalty that they never got from the Empire or from Sid. More importantly, on Pabu, the members of the Bad Batch are allowed to become something other than soldiers. They're valued not as useful subordinates or even as dependable comrades, but just as people. This ultimately allows the members of the Bad Batch to choose their own place in the world rather than having their fates dictated by their original purpose as soldiers. On Pabu, the Bad Batch is able to reinvent itself, and in doing so, they become free in a way most clones simply weren't able to. After all, even among the clones that deserted the Empire, many continued to live as soldiers in some way or another. They continued to adhere to the purpose they had originally been created for, rather than choosing their own paths. They may have been free of the Empire, but these clones still hadn't completely escaped the slavery of their programming and chosen their own paths in life. That isn't to say that they absolutely had to give up fighting to truly be free, but that whatever career they took, soldier or not, had to be their choice. The Bad Batch never really had that choice until Pabu gives it to them. And while the survivors of the Bad Batch ultimately give up the life of a soldier, they do hold on to some of the ethos of the Grand Army of the Republic of their own free will. They continue to think of themselves as a squad, and much of the first season is spent showing the Bad Batch instilling this mentality and the values of loyalty and duty to one's squadmates in Omega. But what the Bad Batch is holding on to here isn't their programming, but their loyalty to and connection with their clone brothers. It's just how they understand the concept of family, and as a result, it's something they hold on to even as they steadily give up all the other trappings of war. In fact, the Bad Batch comes to value squad loyalty more and more as the series goes on, even as they become less recognizable as a squad and more like a family. That transformation mostly owes itself to the Bad Batch's addition to Clone Force 99, Omega. Omega is different from all the other clones in the series, and for one simple reason. She was never a soldier, and she was seemingly never meant to be. She wasn't indoctrinated in the same way as the rest of them, and though she sees the other clones as her brothers, she's a bit alien to them. Consequently, she plays a double role in the group dynamic of the Bad Batch. On the one hand, she provides an outsider perspective, which helps the other members of the Bad Batch develop a better understanding of themselves and their place in the galaxy. On the other hand, Omega learns from the Bad Batch, particularly from Hunter, about loyalty and one's duty to one's squad. Omega and the Bad Batch teach each other, refining one another's values and understanding of themselves. Omega, of course, learns a lot from her brothers, learning valuable lessons from every member of the squad. Hunter teaches her leadership skills, Wrecker teaches her bravery and determination, Echo teaches her loyalty and duty, Tech teaches her precision and strategy, and Crosshair teaches her a bit about pragmatism and tactics. She picks up some of the best traits from each of them while remaining free of the baggage of GAR service, and in the series finale, Omega puts all of these lessons to good use during the final battle on Wayland. But the members of the Bad Batch also learn a lot from Omega. Omega's presence, and in particular her initial over-eagerness to get involved in the Batch's missions, forces the members of the Bad Batch to learn how to deal with, essentially, raising a child. They go about this in a distinctly military way. They train Omega to be part of the squad, and they teach her to shoot, fly starships, and memorize battle plans, among other military duties. But at the end of the day, they're still acting as parental figures, or perhaps more accurately as older siblings taking on parental roles, and this requires them to be more than just soldiers. Omega inadvertently gives her brothers their first taste of civilian life, ultimately facilitating their transition from slaves of their programming to free men. The challenge of raising Omega also reshapes the personalities of the members of the Bad Batch. Hunter, in particular, is greatly affected by Omega, becoming much more fatherly and empathetic as the series goes on. Tech becomes more expressive in the show's second season, and though he initially struggles to connect with Omega, as the two begin to bond, it helps Tech learn to bond with other people as well. In the show's third season, Omega also plays a major role in Crosshair's redemption, instilling in him a sense of empathy that he had completely lacked before. Crosshair isn't the only one to learn empathy from Omega either. To varying extents, every member of the Bad Batch becomes more empathetic as they come to care about Omega and are influenced by her own deeply compassionate outlook. As the series goes on, the Bad Batch becomes increasingly oriented toward doing what's right rather than just laying low and doing what they can to survive, and that's mostly due to Omega's influence. In the process, Omega plays a vital role in helping the Bad Batch understand the show's most important lesson: that they have the freedom to choose their own destiny regardless of what they were created or programmed for. By introducing the Batch to new perspectives and aspects of civilian life, she helps them take control of their lives. With all that said, there's another, less celebrated side to freedom of choice. It allows you to make the wrong choice as well. At the start of the series, that's exactly what Crosshair does, and a large part of the show is dedicated to his own unique journey of redemption. Crosshair's story ultimately leads him to the same conclusion as the rest of the Bad Batch, but via a completely different route. In the process, it gives us more insight into the clones on the other side of the equation, those who remained loyal slaves of the Empire. As we mentioned earlier, initially, very few clones were able to make the choice that Rex and then the Bad Batch did to reject the Empire and choose to be free, and Crosshair's story gives us extensive insight into why. Since the end of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the clones' betrayal of the Jedi and subsequent support of the Empire has been somewhat hand-waved away by the inhibitor chip explanation, which we've always strongly disliked. Initially, that seems to be Crosshair's deal too. In the series premiere, it's noted that his inhibitor chip is less broken than those of the other members of the Bad Batch, and it's strengthened on Tarkin's orders to make Crosshair turn against his squad. But at the end of the first season, in the episode Return to Kamino, the show subverts this by revealing that Crosshair actually had his inhibitor chip removed and that he had been serving the Empire of his own free will. There's some debate over when exactly that happened, but it doesn't really matter. According to the law as it's currently established, inhibitor chips don't rewrite your personality, they only force clones to carry out specific orders. That means that pretty much all the terrible things Crosshair did in Season 1, from ordering his subordinates to burn civilians alive in replacements, to shooting Orn Frita in cold blood in Devil's Deal, were all done of his own free will. And this tracks with how Crosshair had previously been established. In the Clone Wars, he's shown to be a callous, do what needs to be done type, generally lacking in empathy. In the Clone Wars, this is mostly played for laughs, but those kinds of people don't tend to have good moral compasses, so the direction the Bad Batch takes Crosshair's character works. Perhaps more importantly, it's an essential addition to the story. To see why, let's go back to the inhibitor chips for a second. The inclusion of the chip is usually justified by the argument that characters who were as humanized and likable as the clones were in Star Wars: The Clone Wars couldn't carry out such a devastating betrayal as Order 66. The implication is that the kind of people we relate to and feel for, people who we consider to be nice and loyal, would never carry out such atrocities. The problem with this is that, in the real world, people do terrible things, and some of those people might seem perfectly nice and relatable outside of that context. In the real world, there are no inhibitor chips, and yet all of the most horrible atrocities are depressingly commonplace, even in modern times. More often than not, the ones responsible are people who, in other circumstances, we probably would find relatable in some way, and who we could probably be made to feel for. Crosshair's story gives us insight into why people do such terrible things, particularly people that we might otherwise have found agreeable. In Crosshair's case, he was really always at risk of this sort of behavior. A lack of empathy is the big commonality between all of history's worst monsters after all, and his cavalier attitude toward killing probably didn't help either. But in the Clone Wars, it's easy to just pass him off as an edgelord who's otherwise one of the good guys, until he isn't. With that said though, Crosshair's motivations go a lot deeper than that. In the Season 1 finale arc, he explains that he did what he did out of loyalty to the Empire because he saw the Empire as something that gave him purpose, and he resented the Bad Batch for leaving him behind. That's really the crux of the initial part of Crosshair's character arc, and it's the Bad Batch's argument as to why people commit the sorts of atrocities Crosshair does, because his loyalty to the Empire and his obedience to its orders blinds him to the evil of what he's doing. As it usually does, it all comes back to the loyalty of the clones. Both the Bad Batch and the Clone Wars value loyalty highly, but they also show that there can be a dark side to loyalty too, especially loyalty to authority. That sort of loyalty makes people into pawns, making them blind the obedient, and blind obedience is what lays the groundwork for all the worst evils in the world. But Crosshair, of course, isn't blindly obedient. His loyalty to the Empire stems from another source, one that his superiors used to manipulate him just as effectively. Crosshair supports the Empire because it gave him purpose. In this respect, Crosshair is representative of a majority of the clones in the Grand Army of the Republic, the ones that kept supporting the Empire. They didn't care about the politics of it all, they just knew that their intended purpose in life was to serve the government as soldiers, and like most people, they needed a sense of purpose to keep going. We see this same sentiment in the clones in the bar on Coruscant in the Clone Conspiracy. The clones there have accepted fighting for the Empire as their purpose in life, which is why they're even against getting a comfortable retirement. Both for them and for Crosshair, the thought of not having that purpose terrified them, and that kept them in the Imperial camp. Put another way, these clones, Crosshair included, were afraid of freedom. They were afraid of being able to choose their own path and purpose instead of having it dictated to them, because the life of a soldier was all they had ever known, and even for a hardened warrior, the unknown is frightening. This sentiment isn't evil by any stretch of the imagination, but it is dangerous, especially when it leads people to make their service to an authority the bedrock of their personality. Crosshair and the others made the Empire their lives, remained utterly and unconditionally devoted to it, and it was because of that, not because they were fundamentally evil people, that they carried out horrible crimes on its behalf. A lack of empathy, like Crosshair has, also goes a long way in making this easier to swallow. And so, the Bad Batch has Crosshair, a character we once saw as a hero, make a whole bunch of calamitously wrong choices of his own free will. In Kamino Lost, at the end of Season 1, he even turns down a chance at redemption and goes back to serving the Empire even after it tried to kill him. We see it with other clones too, who destroy their own homes on Kamino on Admiral Rampart's orders, who massacre civilians as part of Imperial cover-ups, and who even hunt down their own brothers for betraying the Empire. They do this of their own free choice, not because they're evil, but because they've convinced themselves that they don't really have a choice at all. But they do have a choice, and steadily, Crosshair begins to come to terms with this. It takes a while, because he's still afraid of what leaving the Empire would mean, but over the course of Season 2, Crosshair comes to realize just how hollow his chosen purpose in life is, and how little the Empire values him. In the Outpost, the Empire's callous disregard for his life finally pushes him over the edge. That episode forces Crosshair to confront the truth that Rex faced in the Clone Wars, that the clones were slaves of an uncaring and undeserving government, and that continuing to serve the Empire was stripping them of their agency and humanity. This is enough to break Crosshair's loyalty to the Empire, but the next step for him is much different than it was for the other clones who rejected the Empire. Unlike the Bad Batch, Crosshair doesn't desert, and unlike Rex, he doesn't outright rebel. He just frags his superior officer before collapsing and ultimately being taken into custody. This was incredibly based, don't get us wrong, but it's less of a proper act of rebellion and more of an almost nihilistic last act of defiance. This is because, in spite of everything, Crosshair actually still isn't ready to choose his own purpose in life at this point. He's learned to hate the Empire, but his purpose is still all tied up in it, and he isn't interested in fixing that. If he wanted to, Crosshair could have escaped that situation. He could have waited to frag the lieutenant until after he had recovered his strength and then made his escape, but he didn't, and we suspect this was an intentional choice. Most likely, Crosshair believed that he just would have been executed for his little act of mutiny, and that was fine with him because he'd rather face the barrel of a blaster than face what he's become. At least the wrong end of a blaster is familiar to him. But Crosshair isn't executed. Instead, he's taken to Tantus, where he spends most of his time wallowing in his cell. He makes one escape attempt when he realizes that the rest of the batch is in trouble, mostly out of enduring loyalty to his brothers, but when we return to him in Season 3, he's given up all hope. This isn't just because he's convinced that escape is impossible, but because he's lost his purpose in life and he's too full of guilt and torment to move on to something new. He's trapped in a pit of self-loathing until Omega comes along. Omega, to Crosshair's annoyance, has faith in him, and she more or less drags him along in her own successful escape attempt from Mount Tantus. She guides Crosshair as he reunites with the batch, pushing him to reconcile with the others and to try and heal from what had happened to him. She almost single-handedly pulls him out of that pit of self-loathing, and through the sheer power of her stubborn faith in him, Crosshair finally begins to take life into his own hands. With the utmost reluctance, he develops his own purpose in life at last, rejoining his family and, in the end, settling into civilian life. Along the way, there's a bit of an ambiguous subplot about Crosshair having tremors in his shooting hand. It's established that this isn't the result of a physical problem with his hand, it's a psychological issue. This is generally taken to be a trauma response from what happened to Crosshair on Tantus, but we would theorize that there's more to it than that. It could also be a manifestation of guilt. After all, that's the hand with which Crosshair committed all those horrible crimes in service of the Empire, pulling the trigger on innocent people without so much as a second thought. It starts to improve as Omega helps Crosshair work through his problems, but it never completely goes away. That is, until the hand gets lopped off in the series finale. But perhaps that was a blessing in disguise. Perhaps, as a symbol of what Crosshair had been under the Empire, he had to leave that hand behind in order to truly put that life behind him. That would certainly explain why he never got a droid prosthetic and simply went through life one-handed, especially since that would physically force him to stop being a soldier, as that was his shooting hand. But that's just our theory. In the end, most of the clone characters in the Bad Batch end up in the same place. In the series finale, they take the fight to the Empire in the attack on Tantus. The Bad Batch, Crosshair included, carry out a full assault on Mount Tantus, while Omega leads the clones imprisoned at the base in a rebellion. The clones decisively reject the Empire, break out of their metaphorical chains, and repay Dr. Hemlock and his minions for the injustices inflicted on them. They take their lives into their own hands, asserting themselves not as subordinates, not as pre-programmed soldiers, but as individuals with free will. They fight for their freedom, they achieve it, and then they walk away. The show ends with the fight against the Empire still in its early stages, but the Bad Batch nonetheless decides to step away from it. They retire to Pabu, where they live out civilian lives in a caring and welcoming community. We know from Star Wars Rebels that some of the clones eventually return to the fight, but for now, the fight is over for them. This might be a shocking choice for a franchise that constantly champions fighting against injustice and against the Empire in particular, but it does make sense. In every war, there's a time to attack and a time to retreat, and there was a lot of groundwork that needed to be done before a rebellion against the Empire could truly succeed. The clones did their part, and then they settled down to enjoy the freedom that had long been denied to them. It had never been their choice to fight anyway. They had been made to fight wars on the galaxy's behalf, and while they had done their job as well as they could, it was time for a new generation to pick up the torch, as Omega eventually does in the finale. So, the Bad Batch leaves off in the same way the Clone Wars did, with its heroes deciding to walk away. This time though, they weren't just walking away from service to the Empire, they were walking away from a life of slavery, finally free to choose their own paths in life. It's a triumphant, yet bittersweet ending, and it injects new meaning into one of Star Wars: The Clone Wars' major themes. As we said at the beginning, and in our analysis of the Clone Wars, the clones were fully fledged individuals, but the dehumanizing nature of their service to the Republic and the way it dictated their lives meant that this ultimately didn't count for much. But the Bad Batch turns that back around. It has its clone characters achieve freedom, both from the Empire and from their conditioning, and in doing so, it allows them to reclaim and truly express their individuality. The Clone Wars shows us that the clones are people, and the Bad Batch allows them to finally achieve the agency and freedom of choice inherent to that. So, that's our look back at Star Wars: The Bad Batch, a worthy successor to Star Wars: The Clone Wars. But what do you think? Do you have your own analysis of this show that you'd like to share in the comments section below? Which was your favorite episode and who was your favorite character? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.